to create your family, but how to communicate that story isn't always obvious or easy. Kia ora koutou. I'm Lydia Hemingway and I am the CEO of Fertility New Zealand. Thank you for joining us tonight and welcome to the Fertility New Zealand webinar series. Fertility New Zealand walks alongside all people facing fertility challenges. We do this by providing support, information and advocacy. I encourage you to jump on our website, check out our services and connect with us on social media. Tonight, I'm so pleased to introduce you to Professor Ken Daniels. Ken is our wonderful guest presenter who is going to talk to us about communicating the story of being a donor-built family. Professor Ken Daniels' main area of interest is the psychosocial aspects of assisted reproductive production. Sorry, I'm muddling that up. Let me start again. Professor Ken Daniels' main area of interest is the psychosocial aspects of assisted human reproduction, in particular egg and sperm donation, and the impact on family health and well-being. Ken has dedicated years, and I mean literally years and decades of research in this area. Open communication leads to well-functioning families, and Ken will touch on topics such as when to start, strengthening communication, building confidence, and the importance of sharing and learning. To finish, we'll have some time for questions. Pop them in the chat or comments as you're watching, and we'll go through them with Ken towards the end. I really hope you enjoy the webinar. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you, Lydia. Tēnā koutou katoa. And let me add my welcome as well. I'm very pleased to be able to share with you tonight, and I really hope that you get something useful out of the time that we spend together. This is an interesting topic to be talking about, and I wanted to start by sharing an example with you, if I may. A few years ago, we had a fertility conference. I think it was held here in Christchurch. And there was a couple whose family consisted of them and 3 adult young people. And the husband was one of those DIYers. And he decided that he wanted to change his house around, particularly the inside part of it. And so he spent many hours and a lot of work altering it. And when he finished it, the family all standing beside him, he was looking at it and he said, "Oh, I don't like this. This is all a mistake." And went and got the sledgehammer and started to knock it to pieces. His son said to him, "Gee, Dad, I'm glad I haven't got your genes." And it was a lovely example of openness and communication that was taking place in that family. And the lessons from this example for me are, first of all, about confident family relationships, secondly, about open communication, and thirdly, about natural communication. And these are the themes that I will be discussing in this presentation about strengthening communication. Of course, it's fascinating that this is a session about communication, and communication is invariably two-way. It's between people, and this is strange because for the major part of the session, it's one way. It's me being a talking head sharing with you, but I'm very glad there's going to be the opportunity for questions later, because that will get us involved in an interchange of ideas and discussion. And in that way, the communication will be two-way. I need to share a little bit about me because, what right have I got to be talking to you about these issues? Why should you even bother listening to some of the material that I'm going to share with you? Well, first of all, my involvement in this field began in 1975, which is 48 years ago. And Lydia, you did talk about a long, long time, but I thought you overemphasized it a bit too much. But the changes that have taken place in that time have been absolutely massive. And there have been enormous challenges along the way that I, colleagues and parents have had to struggle through. I think we're now at the stage that I like to call a family focus relating to donor-conceived families. By that, I mean that rather than focusing on the child, rather than focusing on the parent or parents, we're talking about the family. And that really means that we're talking about what happens, in a sense, after treatment has taken place, once conception has occurred. But of course, families have changed dramatically over the period of my involvement. And I want to acknowledge that from my point of view, I take a very broad and comprehensive view of who and what family are. So that there may well be single parents out there, there may well be same sex couples out there. I'm including them as part of family. And you'll probably hear me talk a little bit later on about where the donor fits in terms of the family as well. So my background is that I've been involved in running and taking part in preparation sessions for parents who are wanting to use donor conception. And these took place in Germany. I think there were about 7 or 8 of them that we held over a 4 or 5 year period. But I've also been involved in counselling, and that's been counselling parents, donor conceived persons, donors, and extended family. I've also been involved in research, and that research has been into parents' views and their needs, into donor conceived persons, into donors, to doctors, and the public. So that's a little bit of my professional background, and it's as a result of all of those experiences that I'm trying to pull together tonight some thoughts and ideas about strengthening families. And of course, that's the goal for this session, strengthening communication and developing confidence. I should talk a little bit about the book that I wrote, which you should be able to see on your screen now, Building a Family with the Assistance of Donor Insemination. And this is based on interviews with families around the world who talk about their journeys and their experiences and how they have been managing the issue of being open and honest with their children. And it's a wealth of knowledge that's in there. And it was written for people who couldn't attend webinars like this, people who were on their own or isolated. And it's designed so that, in a sense, you're getting the benefit of other people's experiences as a result of what's written on paper. I always think it's important to recognize that the lens that I look at the world through are influenced by the fact that I'm a male. I can't change that. My age is probably pretty obvious from what you can see on the screen. I'm Pākehā. I can't be Maori. I'm an academic, and that has been the major part of my life over many years. I'm the father of adopted twin daughters. I'm an educator, an advocate, and a counsellor, and I have been involved in policy analysis both in this country and numerous countries overseas. And all of the above will impact on what I will be sharing with you tonight. But please be aware that those are the lens that I see the world through. Thinking about communication, listening, of course, is the cornerstone. And of course, it's listening to the words that people talk about, but more importantly, it's listening to the feelings that lie behind those words. You know how you can hear somebody talking and you can pick up a level of anxiety in their voice, or some hesitancy in the way in which they are trying to communicate with you, or the tone of voice. And so, thinking about communication and listening, this is quite critical. And it's listening to other people, it's listening to partners or other significant people in your life, it's listening to donor conceived persons, the people who make up your family. But communication is also about how we communicate with me. How do I get on? What am I saying to myself? What might you be saying to yourself about how you are viewing the world, how you are viewing the position that you find yourself in? So that self-communication can be quite revealing, and it can also be a very positive, and sometimes it can be negative, because if we see the world negatively, we may be talking to ourselves in negative kinds of ways. And of course, communication between partners where there are two is just so critical and so important. And that's an experience that I want to talk about in relation to the preparation groups that were held in Germany. There we ran a weekend course for people who came from Germany and other parts of Europe. And we usually had about 20 people, 10 couples, because it was only couples who came at that stage. And they were all male, female, because again, the requirements in Germany at that stage only allowed donor conception for heterosexual couples. One of the things that we did in the 2 days was that we split the men and the women into different groups for about an hour. And my colleague, Petra Thorne, who is female, would go with the females and I would go with the males. And at the end of the session, we would come back together. It was always the case that the men were late coming back. And that was fascinating because I tried to keep them to time, but they just wanted to talk and to talk and to talk. And what became obvious was that for many of these men, it was the first opportunity to actually sit down with other men who were feeling the same things, thinking the same things. When they got back into the group, many of the females said, "What were you talking about? What took you so long? You never talked to me." And again, part of the goal for that weekend was to get couples onto the same page, communicating with each other. And it was also clear that what the males were saying, well, we feel very confused. We feel very uncertain. Our female partner gets upset and we try to be consoling and all they do is cry and we don't know how to respond to that crying. We get overwhelmed by it. Others said, well, in those kinds of circumstances, we don't say anything. And then we're accused of not talking and not sharing. What that illustrates really is the need for communication and for communication to be open and clear. And it's when that communication is open and clear that sharing and supporting can actually take place. Having said that, it's not easy to share about challenging matters. I and a member of the Fertility Society used to hold group sessions here in Christchurch, and there was a pattern that developed in the 4 sessions that we had. In the first session, the focus was almost invariably on me as a person. What's happening to me? What are the issues for me? In the second session, the focus shifted to partnerships, both partners talking about issues between them. In the third session, extended family became a focus, and this was without any organization or structure from myself or the other leader. And then in the final session, it was how to manage professionals. And actually, that was quite fascinating and a story all in itself. But this pattern of moving through in group sessions, yes, we do need to communicate with ourselves. We do need to be clear about what's happening. We do need to be clear in terms of the significant people in our lives, which includes partners and extended family, as well as how we manage professionals. Hello, we've got a little bit of a slow, here we are. So talking about confident family relationships, and this is the goal. On the front page of the book that I wrote, I had a lovely quote from a man in Australia who said, It wasn't our ideal way of having a family, but it is our ideal family. It wasn't our ideal way of having a family, but it is our ideal family. For me, that's always the goal. And that goal emerges primarily from being confident. Of course, infertility is a major challenge to confidence. And many of you taking part in this session will know how that lack of confidence has developed very quickly in response to finding out about infertility. I'm wanting to talk about how we move on from that. But the lack of confidence impacts on our thoughts. What's going on in my head? How am I thinking about this? Have I got this all wrong because my thoughts are all jumbled? Well, what about my feelings? Am I feeling sad and upset? Am I feeling elated as it comes time for the treatment? Am I feeling very despondent when it doesn't work? How am I feeling in relation to the children that we have and the communication with them? And what about my behavior? How is my behavior affected, particularly in relation to my partner, if I have one? This is all a journey, as I like to put it, and it continues. It's never ending because the issues come up over and over again, often in very unusual circumstances and in a way that can be quite off-putting for us. But reducing isolation and the support of others, in other words, sharing, this is what this session is all about. Because when we share with other people, when we are engaged in communicating with them, then in fact we become more confident. But who to share with? You know, you will know people who, when you tell them something about yourself and your life experience, especially if it's perhaps a bit distressing, that within no time they're telling you their stories, or they're telling you about somebody that they know or a relative who had exactly the same situation. So we need to be careful about who we share with, because if you are sharing with somebody who responds in that way, it can actually deteriorate your level of confidence. But couple communication, whether there are two or significant people and others, are a vital part of that. And I've talked about what happened in the German preparation seminars and how when people came together and got onto the same page, it was amazing. And one of the pieces of research that we carried out in response to people who were attending those seminars was that we found that before the seminars began, they were entirely in different spaces on a number of significant issues. But as a result of coming together and being with other couples and being in that environment, they came together and there was a shared level of understanding and commitment. And that played a very significant part in their decision-making about how they were going to share with their children, who they were going to share with, etc. The importance of group sharing, I think, is quite crucial. And it's great that Fertility New Zealand is providing opportunities for group sharing. And I hope that they will continue to be taken up, those opportunities. I'm reminded of the statement that was made by one of the adult donor conceived people that was interviewed as part of our research. She says, positive and confident family communication leads to me being positive and confident. That, I think, is really quite a crucial and quite an insightful comment, which I hope might ring some bells for some of you. And we seem to be having just here we are. So open communication. Our research suggests that confidence led to enhanced openness with children and with other people. What stops me from being open with other people? What pressures does that create for me? I want to share something that is really important with me, but somehow or other I don't feel free. am I trying to protect somebody? Am I trying to protect myself? Am I anxious or uncertain about this? If that's the case, then it needs to be thought about in terms of how do I develop my confidence? There was a recent study that was carried out in Brazil of parents who had children as a result of donor conception. And the majority of them feared the negative impact on family relationships if the child knew of its origins. Bit different than what the situation here is here in New Zealand. But what I don't think they were recognizing was the negative impact of the lack of openness and secrecy, the fear that is associated with the inhibitions, the uncertainties about how we're going to communicate about these issues and who are we going to communicate with. There are numerous examples in the literature of people knowing or suspecting without being told that their family was built as a result of donor conception. Non-verbal communication is a vital part that young people are very good at picking up the non-verbal communication in adults and particularly in parents. I'm sorry, but this is just going a little bit slow to get from one slide to another. Kate, do you want to move it on? All right. The communication journey, it is trying things out. It's testing the waters to see how hot or cold the water is. It is a question of saying, can I trust this person? Can I be confident in their response? You know, one of the things that has been said to me over and over again from parents is, I'm worried about how I tell my child that he or she was born as a result of donor conception. I gently try to suggest to them that maybe they're asking the wrong question or looking at this in the wrong way. That another way of dealing with this is to talk about our history, our family history, because this is our story. It's not their story, it's our story. It's about how we became a family, how we are functioning as a family. It's very important to recognize that we have needs, but there are also the needs of the family members that are surrounding us all of the time. Again, there was research results from the donor conceived person study that was undertaken here in New Zealand by myself and a colleague. And a number of them said that they were unable to share their thoughts and questions with their parents because they were upset or they might upset their parents. So there was not open communication there. And that was a real impediment in terms of their confidence level. And of course, open communication with friends and relatives also becomes a vital part, and I've already hinted at. But you know, when I talked about people responding in inappropriate ways, I've often found that people don't necessarily know how to respond. And it's not their fault because they've never necessarily had any experience of this. I'm inclined to say in a situation, and that's with those people, that what I'm hoping for from you, in other words, I want to tell you something, but what I'm hoping from you is that you will be able to understand and listen to me. In other words, our role is in educating them. Now that takes confidence. And let me be very honest about that confidence is hard to develop. It's quite challenging. But it's all about normalizing the whole process of family building via donor conception. And I think belonging to Fertility New Zealand and sharing in groups is a critical part of that whole process. I also made reference to the fact of natural communication. There is not a toolbox to call on. There's not a whole lot of pet phrases that can be used, etc., and pulled out of the toolbox when such and such a situation occurs. It becomes critical that we think about what is our natural communication. What are the words that we are comfortable with? But hang on, there's another element to that. We can learn from others. We can, as I suggested in my book, follow the paths of other people to see what they have said, what their experiences have been, what their reflections have been on sharing information in the way that they have. Other people and their experiences are such a critical learning source for us, but it doesn't mean that we do what they do. It means that we look to find out what is comfortable for us. You know, some of the books that were written for children, there were a lot of books that were written, and some are still being written, that it was kind of thought that, well, you put them on the coffee table and somebody comes in or the kids pick them up and they read them, etc. But, you know, some of those books talked about bunnies and how conception occurred. And some of them talked about eggs in a way that the children thought that they were talking about hens from chooks. You know, we need to be thinking about the words that we use and what comes across naturally and easy, as well as understanding the level that they are at and what makes sense to them and what might not make sense to them. This leads me on to the whole issue of how to think and talk about the donor. And certainly when I've been talking in the UK to parents over there on several occasions, this has been one of the most central and challenging issues for many parents. How do I talk about the donor? But how I talk about the donor is dependent on how I think about the donor. And if we are thinking about the donor as somebody who is a threat, who is a potential challenge, then that's going to impact on the way we talk about the donor. And remember, it's not just about the way we talk about the donor, it's the way in which our children, our offspring, pick up the way we are talking about the donor. Very easy to see the donor as a potential threat to family relationship. Like that study that I was talking about in Brazil, that being open would mean that the children would know about their donor conception and the family building, knowing that in fact there was a donor out there, knowing that they might contact them or want to contact them in the future, or just have information about them. And all of those things can be a little bit of a challenge for parents. And I would be the first to acknowledge that. But it's a challenge that needs to be thought about how do we manage it. And as I say, I think it comes back to how we think about the donor. I've been developing some thoughts over recent times about how we see the donor as a part of the team that are helping us to become a family. I mean, there are the professionals involved, but there is also a donor. They are part of a support or help team that are there for us to enable us to get to the point where we can feel that we have achieved our family status. Some people develop a name for the donor. They call him by name so that they are identified as a person rather than just an anonymous kind of donor. I need to say that recently I have been involved in working with two women who are in their 70s now, who have recently discovered that a donor was used in their family building. And they did not know this until quite a late age. and the issues and implications for them. And what will never go from my memory was the comment of one of those women who was able to talk to her mother about this. And the mother at that stage was, I think, in her 90s. And the daughter tried to explain that there was a misconnect in terms of blood types and so on. And the mother looked at her and she said, "And I thought we had got away with it." And I thought how sad that was, that the whole of that woman's life as a parent had been dominated by keeping a secret and not being open, not having the confidence to be open about sharing these things in a way that would be accepted and just part of the family life and the family experience. It's often important to try out language, to practice, as it were. And some parents that I've spoken to have actually talked about the fact that when they have been pregnant, they've started talking to the baby, the embryo, the about to be born baby, about some of these issues. And this is a way of just enabling them to become more familiar with the language, more understanding of it, and hopefully more confident. So let's move on. Natural communication also is about that couple communication and recognizing the feelings and the differences that I was highlighting by talking about the German situation. You know, we actually can see things and we perhaps recognize them, but don't have the confidence to bring them out into the open so that they can be dealt with. We might ask ourselves, how do we see family? Because the predominant pattern, particularly the thought pattern over many years, is that family consists of people who are biologically or genetically related. We are all genetically tied together in a way. Well, of course, we don't fit into that category, do we? So what does this mean? How do we see our family, particularly in terms of its naturalness? And I was interested, Lydia, that you used the word special at one stage in the introduction. And I think this is a word that many parents find helpful and comfortable. But I am aware that it's the family that is special, not the child that is special. It is our family that has chosen to be created in a different kind of way. And that's what makes us special. If you actually are talking about the child as special, then you stand the risk of that child feeling as if they are unique, which of course they are, but also different. Whereas in fact, they are part of a family constellation. That ties in with the whole question of how do we see the significance of genetics? You know how people come along and they want to say, oh, he's got his mother's eyes or his father's nose or whatever. It's a pretty common way of interacting in our society. How do we feel about the fact that the genetics aren't necessarily what people think they are? And how do we actually manage that in terms of our communication with each other and with the offspring? These are questions that there are not any specific answers to. These are questions that need to be thought through and discussed by the people involved so that natural communication starts to emerge. And just sharing our infertility story is an important part of that. How do we describe to people that we were not able to have children and we chose this way of building our family, etc.? What words do you use? Because the more natural the words we use, the more comfortable the other people who are the listeners will be about hearing that. And of course, listening to our children or our adult children, whatever age they might be, the donor-conceived person. What words do they use? How do they describe things? I've always been a little bit uncertain in my own mind when I have heard donor-conceived people use the term father in relation to the donor. But that's my hang-up, as it were. I would prefer for them to be identified as a donor, because fathers are people who are involved in the nurturing, caring, loving, ongoing upbringing of the child. The donor is only there at the beginning. But when we listen to donor-conceived people, if that's the terminology that they're using, it's important that we acknowledge that terminology. And at some stage, there can be a discussion about it. But it's not that we should feel threatened that they are talking about the donor as a father. It may just be a reflection of a level of understanding at that point. And a comment about relaxed communication. It's a bit like that illustration that I gave at the beginning, relaxed and open communication, where there is freedom to joke, to talk about, and not to get hung up on issues associated with the history of the family building. So let me move to the next slide. Some conclusions. I wonder where your confidence level is at the moment. I wonder whether tonight you have heard some things, thought about some things, or whether you'll think about things in the future that might help you to reflect on that confidence level. And is there some work that can be done on developing it? That's a question. How do I enhance my confidence level? Well, I've already suggested that one of the most critical ways is by open communication, and particularly open communication with those whom you love, and those who love you, and those who you trust, and those who will understand. The importance of sharing and learning is just such a critical part of developing that confidence. There is no doubt in my mind that open communication, which we talked about earlier, leads to well-functioning families. When there are secrets, when there are hidden parts of our lives, that causes potential issues. And to what extent do we move into open communication? Well, I'm suggesting that the more open, the better. And that includes open acknowledgement of the donor and talking about the donor and their contribution. And the donor-conceived person's perspective needs to always be in the back of our minds. I mean, I can be preoccupied about thinking about what's important for me and how it is for me. But the other part of this is I'm a parent. So what does it mean for this person that I am parenting? What does it mean for this person that I am seeking to love? And how can I love them in the most productive way so that their health and well-being is enhanced? And one final slide. When we talked to donor-conceived adults here in New Zealand, and there were 21 of them in the study that was undertaken, and they aged in range up to 41, what we were able to conclude from what they were saying was that how they viewed themselves was impacted by family relationships. Their understanding of family history was impacted by family communication. And the question of who is my family was impacted by understanding of connectedness. thank you for taking part and listening, and I look forward to questions and comments. Thank you. So am I back with you now, Lydia?
Hi there, Ken.
Ah,
Hi there. Thank
I was
you.
getting concerned that I'd lost you.
No, I'm still here. Thank you so much, Ken. That was just so good. And I was lucky enough to see you speak about a year ago, and it was really really great presentation then, along with some donor conceived people that were along at that session, which just really reinforced it as well. We've just got a few questions here, Ken. Here's one here. Are there some resources out there for talking with people about being a donor-built family? For example, older siblings and other family members?
I didn't pick up the first part of that, Lydia. Sorry.
Are there some resources out there for talking with other people about being a donor-conceived family, donor-built family?
Yes, there are. There are actually a large number of resources, and they keep getting published. And what's interesting is that many of them are being published by people who are in the family situation, either those who are donor conceived persons, those who are parents, who are talking about their experiences, etc. I think Fertility New Zealand's probably got a list of those, hasn't it, that is on the website?
There are some resources on the website, so please do check it out or get in touch with us at support@fertilitynz.org.nz.
But
Cool.
I think one of the things is that the resources are a critical part of it. But as I was trying to say, one still needs to actually convert that into something that is natural and your response, etc. And I haven't seen books that actually work at helping you to develop your confidence. Those are the books that still need to be written. I mean, I've been talking at a more general level, and I think what I would really want to focus on is that developing that confidence level and to be able to use those books is part of sharing in groups.
I know what you mean, Ken. I've heard a family, one particular woman I know of, talk about that, initial feelings that it wasn't, her story to tell. It was the child's story, that it was, not something that they knew how to talk to people about. And that was just all about building confidence and understanding as well. She got there in the end, which was really cool. Hey, there's another one here. Oh, sorry.
I used to think about the fact that a lot of people talked about having the book on the coffee table or getting a book. But the real skill is in how do you use that book? How do you make it meaningful and relevant and so on? So it's one thing to have it, great, but it's also managing its use.
Yeah, that's very, very true. There's a question through from Facebook. Thank you, Ken. Do you have anything to comment on donor conceived kids meeting their donor once they're older?
I've been involved in quite a few link-ups between adult donor conceived people and their donors. Every one of them has been very special and very successful and very important. There sometimes is some concern. Is that thing coming up on your screen or mine? Something's coming up on my screen that I don't want to be there.
Ken. That's all right.
Okay. Yeah, Just get rid of it. Sorry. Yeah, I can't see myself, and that's that's a bit disconcerting.
We can
Right, I
still hear
can now.
you. Great.
Um, yes, I think the way in which that is managed becomes again important. It's not that it shouldn't happen. It's that when there is an expression of interest in either half siblings or the donor, then responding to that in the way that avoids what I was talking about before, where parents feel as if they are being threatened by the questions or the particular approach is important to recognise. But by and large, I've actually been involved in linking situations where the parents have sometimes been brought into the whole situation within a short period of time, because that's what the donor and the offspring wanted to happen. But it is an unusual situation. I mean, it's not something that happens every day, or that you know a lot of people who've done it or whatever. So again, in my book, I have lots of examples of how that has been managed by other families. But I think the crucial point that I would make is that yeah, moving at the pace and moving at the understanding of a donor conceived person, and being confident that this is not going to threaten the relationship that you have with that person.
Yeah. Just as a follow-up to that question is also just about, I guess, a question and the importance around meeting any siblings or half siblings, I guess, that are out there, and that linking side of it. Do you have any comments to make about that?
That's becoming an increasing issue. And interestingly enough, in some countries overseas, there is a higher interest in meeting the half siblings than what there is the donor. And I think that's partly because it's very hard, or has been very hard in the past, to make contact with the donor. But what the half siblings are really saying is, hey, you are part of my family. And that whole question of genetic link versus psychosocial link and so on is really being put out into the open. And it's how we actually acknowledge that that genetic link is significant and relevant, not because they want them to become brother or sister in the same way that they don't want the donor to become father, but they want to see them as part of the family, the broader family network. And that can be a little bit scary for some people, to start thinking of our extended family. But if you think about it in Maori terms, this is quite a natural and acceptable way of looking at things.
Thanks, Ken. Another question through Facebook. I've got a naturally conceived 6-year-old and a 6-month-old donor egg baby. Would you advise I explain the situation to my 6-year-old first before telling my donor conceived baby?
Well, I suspect that it's going to be a while before you get to talking in too much detail to the 6-month-old baby. But I think I've always thought that one of the useful things is that when opportunities come up, like you see something on television, or some friends have a child by adoption, or some other means, then in fact you can actually introduce that into the subject. You know, that our family is a bit like that family, but in slightly different ways. I would then be leaving it at that, because the child is likely to come back when they want more information. One of the risks, of course, is that we overload them with information, when in fact all I want to do is to hear this, yes, but go out and play. And it's been quite fascinating how some parents have talked about that. Here I was building myself up, all anxious about sharing this with my child. I do so, and within a few seconds they're saying, can I go out and play now? But later on they come back, and something has registered, and they are wanting to take the lead And then you are in the position of responding to that rather than initiating.
So true, so true. Somebody's just asked, is there a recording of this webinar? I've got a friend who I think would benefit. The answer is yes. This will be uploaded onto the Fertility New Zealand website, and that will be an ongoing resource. So whenever your friend is ready to have a look, the recording will be there. Sometimes it takes a day or two, but it will be there. Another question, how do you talk to other family members, which we've talked about, but also people you're not super close to? And I sort of wondered about that too, because there's sort of other people that I think at times it would really benefit to them understanding a bit about the nature of the family and the donor built family. People like teachers or doctors, are there any sort of ideas around how to approach that, Ken?
Yes, the advent of morning talks at school can be quite fascinating. when children go and start say, "Well, I've got two daddies," and or two mummies, and that the teachers can be quite taken aback by this and not know how to manage it. I always think that open communication with those who have some ongoing care and responsibility for our kids is pretty crucial. And that includes doctors, it includes teachers in particular, or anybody else who might be significant. Sometimes sporting coaches may be in a position, but it's really not that you're saying, look, you have to treat my child in a special way. It's really, look, I thought you might like to know that if our child raises an issue about this, we're very happy and very easy about that, because this is how our family was built, and we're very pleased about that and very proud of it. Having said that, very proud of it, I have to say that one family that I knew here in Christchurch actually, and this was some time ago when things weren't as positive as what they are now, actually put a birth notice in the paper and said, with special thanks to the donor. So they were publicly saying right at the outset for everybody, look, this is how we have our family.
Amazing. Yeah, love it. What about your the child knowing their donor from birth? Is this recommended if you have a good relationship?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, because I think there's a sense in which a child needs to identify with the parents and bond with the parents. And these are the people who are going to be there for life. They're the ones who are the nurturing, caring ones. On the other hand, somebody who is there in a genetic role, as it were, may want to have some involvement. And I think then one has to question whose needs are being considered most importantly at this point in time. And sure, there is potentially a role, and that role is one of support, the supplying of sperm, etc. But I think a child will come to recognizing that another person is involved. But given that they don't understand about the nature of their family building, who is this other person? What is the meaning? And it's just another challenge. And it may work out fine, but I would just be wanting to think very carefully about that.
Thanks, Ken. I've got quite a few questions coming through, so we'll just try and get through as many as possible. Thank you for sharing, Ken. Are there existing groups that are for donor families with close relationships between the donor and recipient families? So,
not in New Zealand that I'm aware of. The adult donor conceived people have their own group, and that is becoming a very significant and very important group, and involved in advocating for change and for provision of services. But were you thinking particularly about family, parents, or whole family?
I'm not 100% sure on that comment. So if the person wanted to write a wee bit more and post that, then that would be great. But I just wanted to say that the Fertility New Zealand does have a Facebook group, which is the Donor Conception and Surrogacy group. That isn't quite a relationship between the donor and recipient families, but that it is an area and a site of support for people that are looking at donor-built families as an option for them, and also after, both before and after that happens. So I encourage you to check that out as well.
I think it would be beneficial to have some groups like that.
Yeah. I imagine there's some private groups and things out there as well, but it's all managed in a way that's quite private. Hi, Ken and Lydia. We've been speaking to our 2 embryo donor conceived children since they were born in a very basic way about how we became a family. I wonder at what stage we should begin to give them more in-depth information about this. They are 4 and 6 years old. Thanks.
If you've already been talking to them and they have some understanding of how your family was built, why not wait until they start showing some more interest in this? Why don't you wait until they start asking some questions? Because we're not necessarily the best judges of when when children should be told something. I think if the topic is being discussed openly, if it's on the family agenda, as it were, then there will be times when they will sort of say, I want some, what does this mean, or whatever.
Thank you. Really useful to think of this in terms of the family's origin story rather than just the child's. So really, really valuable in shifting that perspective, I guess. Thank you for that comment. Hi, Ken and Lydia. We've been talking, I've read that one. Do you have any recommendations on responding to someone who has a negative response to donor-conceived families?
Sorry, I just missed that, Lydia. Could you repeat it, please?
Do you have any recommendations on responding to someone who has a negative response to donor-conceived families?
Yeah. Avoid them. In some ways, because they're going to be a drain on your energy and so on. And let's face it, probably the negative reaction is based on something which can't be changed by rational information. It may well be that it's a feeling, a belief that lies behind all of this, that is unnatural, or it's, as they used to say in the old days, it was an example of adultery, etc. To me, the issue is much more specifically about who can I talk with, and you can't change everybody, and I don't think we should even try. Maybe a question, sorry to be saying this, but it may be a question of choosing your friends. While I think it's nice to try and educate people, there are some people who have got their minds made up, and that's it.
Yeah, indeed. Now, the previous question we had, just asking if there was existing groups for donor families with close relationships between the donor and recipient families, and that person's come back saying that it's 2 close couples who are doing an embryo donation. So I think there aren't specific groups that we're aware of as such at the moment, but maybe drop a line through to support@fertilitynz.org.nz, just in case our wider team has any additional ideas about that one, and we'll come back to you as soon as we can.
The other thing about that, as a result of this session tonight, some people might want to be in contact with others. And if you wrote to Fertility NZ and sort of said, look, I'm interested in this, they could post it on their website, and there may well be a linking that starts to occur.
Yes, and do keep an eye on our Facebook page, particularly our Donor Conception and Surrogacy Network group. If you have any trouble finding it, just flick us through an email on our support line and we can send you a link. Awesome. I think that actually comes to the end of the questions that are there. I'll just do a double check.
Right on 9 o'clock.
And that's right on 9 o'clock, so that's absolutely perfect. Oh, hang on, one more. Oh, there are quite a few. Did you have any thoughts about communicating to a child about being conceived by a gestational surrogacy? This is a same-sex male couple.
No, just the same principles that I was suggesting earlier on, being very open, being able to identify that this is how the family chose to become a family, and how you're an important part of this family, and that there are other people who are part of our support network, etc. No, I don't think there's anything specific, except, as I say, listening to when children are asking questions.
Yeah. There was just one other question, Ken. Do you have any comments on donor conceived children having contact with donor siblings, or sometimes known as dibblings? And we sort of touched on that before, so I hope that question got answered already for that person that posted that. We'll just bring it to an end now. That's perfect timing. Thank you so much. It was so great to hear from you, Ken, and it clearly has provoked lots of questions and thinking, and it's just been such a great session. We really appreciate you taking the time to put together this presentation and be here with us this evening. It's a really emotional...
I did put up my email address if there's anything personal that somebody wants to follow up on.
Great. So I think that's in the chat, but if anybody didn't grab that, feel free to email us and we can flick you that as well. Ken's welcome if people have a situation or question that's of a more personal nature that you would rather not have in the chat box here tonight. But thank you so much, Ken. It's been a delight having you join us tonight for the webinar. So as mentioned, this is recorded and will be posted on our website in the next day or two. And make sure to follow us on Facebook and keep an eye on our website to keep up to date with our webinar series. We'll actually be taking a break over the holidays, so we'll be back in February. So keep an eye out for that first topic in the new year. We do wish everybody, I know it seems silly to say this, it's still November, but we do wish everybody a wonderful holiday season and a big thank you again for Ken tonight. And also we have a webinar sponsor, which is Merck, of which we are really grateful for. So thank you, right on time. Brilliant. We hope everybody has a lovely evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.